Welcome back to Advice from Your Advocates. I'm Robert Mannor. I'm a certified elder law attorney here in Michigan. And on Advice from Your Advocates, we talk to interesting people that are involved in the aging network, in the long-term care industry, anything relating to seniors and anything related to the caring aging network. So today we have a very exciting podcast. It's on a very innovative kind of topic. It is care planning and elder care and dementia care planning in particular. This is an innovative type of a thing, in particular as it relates to law offices. So we have today Danielle Chwalibog as our elder care coordinator at Mannor Law Group. And we're going to talk to you about what elder care and dementia care coordination is and how it came about. So Danielle, hi.
Hi.
And so can you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Mannor Law and what your role is?
Yeah, so I am an elder care coordinator. My role here is to help family through the transitions of aging, whether that be help find services for in-home care, placement in an assisted living or memory care, or into a long-term nursing care facility. I also support and provide resources to family throughout that process.
So I want to talk a little bit about how this came about. And, most people wonder, well, first of all, tell us your educational background.
Yep. So I have a bachelor's in social work and a master's in social work as well. I've been in the nursing home and medical field for about 6.5 years before I started here at Mannor Law Group.
And so I want to talk a little bit about how this came about to be part of our office. So it is, like I say, innovative. I believe we're probably either the first or second law firm in Michigan to bring this to Michigan in any substantive and aggressive way. And we actually learned this, and the real innovator on this was attorney Tim Takix from Tennessee. And probably a good 20 years ago, he started realizing that a good portion of the work that we do as elder law and Medicaid attorneys and veterans benefits attorneys, that a good part of the work isn't just the legal part, isn't just the financial part, but there's so much more to it. There's so much more advocacy and really trying to get the best results, the best quality of life for our clients and their families. And a lot of that involves more than just the legal financial. It is about making sure that we have good care, making sure that when we run into stumbling blocks, that we can get past those stumbling blocks. If the hospital's kicking us out too soon, how do we deal with that? If we're not feeling like we're getting good care in the facility, how do we deal with that? How do we pick care? How do we choose care? All of those things are part of what we do as part of this elder care and dementia care coordination. So this was something innovated by this attorney, Tim Takix in Tennessee. I studied with him, several others in my law office studied with him, and he's now gone on to create a whole community of law firms that include this as part of their services. We've been doing this for close to 10 years now, and we were one of the first firms, I think, that sort of brought this to this area, at least the state, if not this area of the state. And we found it to be very successful because what we're doing is we're filling in the gaps. We're making sure that, yes, we can help you figure out how to pay for care, but there's also how do we make sure it's good care? How do we know that we have the right care? How do we get through the confusing and sometimes difficult healthcare system? So, Danielle, tell us a little bit more. Give us a few examples of how you might work with a family. And so someone comes in and let's just say, I'll give you a couple of examples and you can kind of just talk about it. So my first example would be a family comes in and it's a married couple and they've been getting by just fine, but one spouse has dementia and the dementia has been getting more and more severe. Some form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or Lewy body or vascular, but it's been getting more and more aggressive. And you can just see on the other spouse's face how tired they are, how exhausted they are. And they don't want to say it out loud, but they're putting everything they have, their heart, sweat, and tears into caring for their spouse. So give us an idea of what you can do in that situation where one spouse is the caregiver spouse and one spouse has dementia.
Yeah, so our main goal is to prioritize helping seniors achieve the highest quality of life possible. So we're going to look at what type of care, whether it be in home, in a nursing home, if that wife or husband is just feeling so overwhelmed and we need to have that difficult conversation of placement, that's where we have that conversation. And it's a very open conversation. We provide a lot of empathy during that. We're compassionate toward those family members that are struggling. And we want to make sure that they know that the resources are out there for them and what is available to them to use. A lot of times they see that seniors and elderly couples don't know what's available. And so they just continue on struggling through their everyday, not realizing that there are services that are available to them. One other great option is looking at respite stays. If a loved one truly wants to keep their demented spouse at home but needs a little bit of a break, we can access resources like a respite stay where they stay for a week and that spouse kind of gets a relaxation. And we can utilize that type of resource as well to help the spouse truly feel more comfortable with the care that they're providing their loved one.
And in that way, we really are providing sort of holistic and complete services, because one of the big questions and why people come to us, they probably don't know to come to us because of all of Danielle's great help. And we have other care coordinators here, but Danielle's great help. They come to us because they're not sure how to pay for care. They're not sure what's the best way, what resources do we need? Are there benefit programs out there that can help pay for it? And so that's my job, and Danielle's job is to make sure that we get good care and that we smooth through those transitions and help make decisions. I think that's a big part of what Danielle can help with, is helping to make the decision. Okay, we want to make sure mom and dad stay in their house. That's what mom and dad both want. Okay, well, how can we do that? How can we look at the house and make sure that it's suitable? How can we say, okay, this house is not suitable and maybe we have to look at an apartment, or we have to look at moving in with kids, or any of those reasons. We have to look at all of these options. And it's so difficult for a family who's never been through this. What I typically see with families, and Danielle, you can back me up on this, is they kind of zero in on one option, but they don't know what the other options are. And it's because there's so many different pieces and parts moving here. And what Danielle can help them with is actually kind of narrowing down those options, exploring other options they didn't even know existed, and figuring out what's going to be best for each individual family.
And another thing, Bob, is having a professional help you to advocate through that process always predicts a good outcome. So, you can draw on our professionalism and what we know, and we know that we're going to get a good outcome based off of what the family wishes.
And, one of the things that we deal with is a lot of the times the families, and absolutely true, the families are doing their best to advocate for their parents and try to do what's best for their parents. There's two things that I think that there's a struggle there. I know, Danielle, that you've had family that has gone through this. I've had family that's gone through this. So we have personal experience and we know what that's like to be a family member dealing with this. But we have a little bit of a different advantage too, because we've helped a couple hundred families deal with this. And we know the relevant people to talk to. We know the options that we have. We know the resources. We know which places, and I shouldn't say this honestly, but we know which places provide better care than other places. And so it's one of those things, it's just relying on our experience. I don't know how you feel about this, Danielle, but my dad raised me to be very self-sufficient. And so he taught me to do everything myself. I did my taxes myself. I mowed my own, I changed my oil myself. I mowed my grass myself until I realized I started doing this where we're sort of have this certain level of expertise beyond what other people have. And what I realized was I'm not particularly good at doing my taxes. I'm definitely not very good at mowing my lawn. Somebody else can do that much better than me. and oil change for what, $20. I can get somebody to do it, and I don't have to spend the whole afternoon and bloody my knuckles when I do it. So I don't know if you have that kind of perspective, but that's where I came from. Was we had to do everything ourselves. We had to be self-sufficient, and I realized that sometimes you really do have to rely on those people that have the experience to help you through this crisis.
And Bob, I agree. I think that our aging population has that mindset where they have to be so self-sufficient. And sometimes they're afraid to ask for help. And that's why we're here. We're here to walk them through the process. We're here to be their advocate. We're here to help them get the good care and support that they need through their aging years.
One of the things that kind of leads to a great question is what is the family involvement in this? How do we involve the family, and what is and I'm going to partially answer the question. It's crucial. We can't do this without, I always say, one of the things you hear me say all the time is that we help people that have people they love and trust. And it's really difficult for us to help somebody that doesn't have anybody they love and trust, because we're going to have to rely on the government or some stranger to take over. And we're not usually involved in that. So you have to have family. So how can family be involved in this process? So
it's going to be a tough process. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be tough during this time, not physically, but also emotionally. You're overseeing your parents go through something that maybe you thought they would never have to go through, and you're having to be kind of the spokesperson for them and make decisions and help them make the decisions that you thought you probably never would have to make. So family involvement is very crucial. Like Bob said, we like to have everybody on the same page. If we're not all on the same page, we try to team meetings and family meetings where we do get everybody on the same page. But your role as the family member is so crucial in this, to be able to support your loved one and helping them make that decision. And again, it's not an easy decision. It is a very tough decision when you finally realize that your loved one needs placement. And so having that support makes that decision a lot easier from the sick senior side.
I will say this, that I think we do a particularly good job of helping families get through that conflict. Now, if it's absolute conflict where everybody's hiring lawyers and they're being greedy, or that they have the wrong motives, we're probably not the lawyers for you. To be honest, we're not going to get involved in that fight. That's just not a fight that we're willing to have. What we're willing to do is deal with the conflict when everybody really does seem to be looking out for mom and dad's best interest. And sometimes the family members don't think the other ones are. Sometimes the family members are thinking, oh, they seem like they're being greedy. Well, I think it's all about perspective. And sometimes what we're able to do is be the outside party that comes in and helps what we're going to look at every family member as coming in with good intentions. That's our presumption walking into it. Now, I'll be honest with you, we've experienced some family members that we didn't think they were coming in with good intentions. But sometimes the family members where the siblings say, well, my sister isn't coming in with good intentions. And then we meet with them and we say, I think it's just a different perspective. It's not a wrong perspective to say, boy, mom and dad worked so hard to pay off their house and to save a little bit of money, and to see all of that go out the window. That's not a bad perspective. That's not being greedy. That's being realistic. That's saying, what options are there? I'll give an example. Sometimes, people say, oh, well, that sounds being greedy because, they work so hard and we're going to spend all of it on them. Well, what if there's programs out there that would pay for it and you don't have to spend everything? It's kind of like taking a tax deduction. Nobody says, oh, you're terrible because you take a tax deduction from the interest from your house. Of course, you're going to take that tax deduction. Anybody's going to take a tax deduction that they're allowed to take. When it comes to this, though, some of those deductions or ways that you can protect your money aren't overly obvious. That's why people hire accountants. That's why people hire us to help them preserve the money. And that's not a bad motive. It is a bad motive if we say we're doing it exclusively and we're not looking out for making sure that mom and dad get the best care. But it is not a bad motive to say, can we make sure they get the best care and make sure that we don't impoverish them? So, one of the things that we've all just gone through and maybe still are going through a worldwide pandemic. And so that's affected everything. And it's very much affected long-term care. So tell us, Danielle, a little bit about how COVID has affected your work and all the things that we do.
So COVID's, like Bob said, affected everybody. Long-term care and senior services were impacted greatly. Staffing was very hard to find. Nursing homes were hiring agency nurses who didn't really know their systems and processes. Caregiving was very far and few between because people couldn't go to their homes and be in their homes and provide the care. So it really was a rough time for our seniors, the most, I think, during our COVID period. Things have started getting better from what I've talked to a few nursing homes. Staffing seems to be on the up. There are still some facilities that do struggle with staffing. But again, if we plan for the future and we plan sooner rather than later in our elder care community, we know that at some point we might run into a staffing issue, but we can handle that. We can advocate. That's what we're here for. Mom is not being turned or not getting her showers on the day that she is supposed to be getting them as per her care plan. That's when we step in and we say to the facility, hey, I know you guys are short staffed, but this is on the care plan. And this is what you guys are supposed to be doing. And how can we fix this? How can we work around? Maybe we do a shower at nighttime instead of the morning because there's more staff available. But going back to staffing and COVID-19 and how it's impacted our world, it is turning around slowly. It will be a big build to get nursing homes back to the staffing ratio that they were, but they are getting there slowly.
So that leads into a real good question about when people should start thinking about this and planning. And I'll partially answer before I turn it over to Danielle, but it's never too early. This is going to sound funny because we're talking about long-term care, but I think 18-year-olds, once you turn 18, you're an adult, you need some legal documents. You need a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. You need a HIPAA waiver, and so the idea is it's never too early to plan, but give us an idea a little bit more realistically about if, let's say, you've got an early diagnosis of dementia. At what point do we start saying, okay, well, we should probably get our legal affairs and look at what our options are and those types of things?
Right away. As we know, a sudden medical crisis could happen tomorrow, or we could be in the parking lot and unfortunately have a car accident, or something could happen. And so having those documents and that planning in place as soon as possible is going to be so crucial for you to continue to live the life that you've envisioned for your aging self. We talk about a healthy person living at home has slight confusion, some forgetfulness. They fall and break a hip and they no longer can live at home. And then we don't have documents for their loved one to make decisions for them. We're talking about now going to court and having to possibly get guardianship and maybe the government taking charge of the decisions. And we want to avoid that. And so that's why we always encourage anybody to come in sooner rather than later. Get the documents that you need through estate planning, through elder care, get everything in order so that way you can just continue to live your life and it's not something that you're rushing around to do when that crisis does happen.
Yeah, and that's very important. And there's a couple of thoughts I have on that. One is that all documents are not made equal. And so I know there's, especially for younger folks like Danielle, there's a tendency to want to just do everything online. And hey, I don't have to talk to the pizza person. I just put it in, they deliver the pizza, they drop it off the door. I don't have to see anybody. There's no cash to the exchange. Younger people really like that kind of stuff. And so there's a tendency to want to do that with legal documents. And the reality is, that is often not going to be sufficient because we have what we call dementia-specific legal documents. What does that mean? And I'm going to tell you exactly what that, well, I'm not going to tell you exactly because there's about 14 different things that are highly detailed, but I'm going to give you an idea of what I mean by this. By the time that the crisis occurs and you need help setting out this plan and figuring out how we're going to pay for it and doing all of that, you typically, if there's dementia involved, you typically are unable to participate in that conversation, to authorize that. You say, hey, Bob, I saw you on this podcast, or I listened to this podcast, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year, whatever. And I just had a fall and I have a little dementia. And so now I need to invoke some of those things. And how do I do that? And I'm coming to see it. typically you're not able to do that. It'd be your spouse or your child or whatever. And the thing is, when I say dementia specific, it means we have to, in some ways, pre-authorize some of the things that we can do for you. If I don't have that pre-authorization, we try to find workarounds, but it's probably going to be a little bit more costly, more time consuming, and possibly we might have to go to court for that. Even if you have a power of attorney, even if you have a trust, like I say, all legal documents are not created equal. We have specific language, I would call it sort of dementia specific, that if somebody has dementia, they sort of pre-authorize some of the planning that needs to be done for them later when they're not capable of authorizing it. Two other things about what you just said, because you just had a whole lot of information in your last answer. One is that you have, diagnosed with dementia, you have a little bit of dementia, and then a fall happens. Well, I've often said for years, a lot of people, when I ask them, hey, do you ever want to go to a nursing home? Almost 100% of people say, I never want to go to a nursing home, right? And so I have an answer for that. You want to avoid, I have a lot of clients in nursing homes, not because they want to be there or because I want them to be there, but because that's the only option for them. And so you want to avoid a nursing home? I have an answer for you. But you ready? This is important. Don't break your hip. Don't fall. Don't stumble. Because a very large percentage of our clients, that was the first thing that happened, and then things spiraled out of control. They broke their hip, they stumbled, they broke their leg, they fell down the stairs, they fell down the walk up to their house, they tripped over their cat or their dog. And what happened next? Well, they called the ambulance. All the commotion of that. Maybe they're getting older and they have a little bit of memory loss, a little bit of dementia, but all the commotion of the ambulance coming in, and maybe they even break the door down, whatever. You go to the hospital. What happens at the hospital? You catch COVID, or you catch MRSA, or you catch whatever's going around at the hospital. Well, that kind of takes you down another. And there, what happens at hospitals? Many years ago, probably like close to 10 years ago now, I was in the hospital for one night, and I remember they woke me up at 2 a.m. They woke me up at 4:30 a.m. just to take my blood pressure or whatever they were doing. And like, okay, so now you've had all that commotion of somebody, an ambulance coming and getting you, you're caught, whatever it is, you're in the hospital longer than it is because you got whatever infection, you're getting disoriented because you're not getting good sleep, and there's noises, and the nurses are doing their best job, but there's, they got to do their job, and they got to work with the other patient next to you. And it's very disruptive to your brain and your mind and everything else. And then they say, okay, well, you can't go home right away because you have a broken hip or broken leg. We got to get you stronger. So we send you to rehab. And now you're in rehab, a new environment, and you might have a roommate, and there's things going on, and there's sounds and noises, and you're doing all these things. And maybe they forgot your glasses and they haven't got your hearing aid in. And in my experience, that's what leads to that downward spiral. I know that doesn't sound, people don't believe me on this, but a vast majority of our clients, the reason they end up in a nursing home for the rest of their life was something simple happened. They broke their hip, they broke their leg, they had that crisis, that fall, and everything goes downhill from there. That's why I say we want to get in front of these things before we think we need to. One of the things that Danielle and I are often advising people is accept help before you think you need to. Earlier, I was talking about my dad being self-sufficient and teaching me to be self-sufficient. It's very hard for me to talk to that generation and tell them you need to accept help, because they're like, I can do it myself. I'm fine. I can do it myself. And my advice is we need to get help before you think you need it to avoid that broken hip, to avoid that fall, to avoid that spiral downward. So that was the second thing that I thought was packed into your answer there. The final thing is, not only is it never too early to plan, it's never too late to plan. And so that's really important, because I don't want you to think that, oh, it's too late. They're in the hospital. In fact, that's the scenario I'm going to give you next. I'm going to give you an example of, okay, now they're in the hospital. So they're in the hospital. They never got their documents done. They have bad documents. They're not bad documents, but ones that don't have the dementia language in it. And so, it's never too late. I never had a situation where I turned somebody away and I said, there is absolutely nothing we can do here. Sometimes it's harder than others. Sometimes we have to go into court and ask a judge for permission. Mm-hmm. Don't want to have to do that. That's why we want to plan ahead. But it's better than the alternative of letting things happen to you and potentially lose everything. So, Danielle, I want to ask you one last scenario here, and it's really a two-part scenario. which is now instead of a married couple, we have, maybe it's a single person, maybe the spouse has died. Let's say dad has died and now mom was taken to the hospital. So the two parts of it is the hospital saying, okay, well, we're done here. And family, you got to figure out what's going to happen next. And not only the family, but the hospital saying she can't go home without 24-hour care. So that scenario, or just as common, if not more common, that they say, okay, the hospital says, no, we're going to transfer her over to the rehab, get her a little bit stronger, get her some physical therapy, occupational therapy, maybe speech therapy, those types of things. But then at some point, and often very quickly, the rehab says, you can't stay here. And where are we going to go next? And oh, by the way, she can't be left alone anymore. Mom can't be left alone anymore. So those are scenarios where can absolutely be helpful, but can you give us some idea of what that looks like when people call us in those, what I call crisis situations?
Yep. So when they're in that crisis situation, we bring the family in, we get all the background information. We try to discuss what services that we can offer, what are our best options, what we can provide to the family and to that senior that's currently in the hospital or in the nursing home. A lot of times when you're in a nursing home or in a hospital, like Bob said, it's okay, we're ready to discharge you, but here's our recommendation. And then that's it. The resources or lack thereof aren't always available. Where you have with our office in the elder care community, a professional that's walking you through the next steps. We'll advocate with the hospital. Okay, we're not ready to have them discharged yet. We need time to get care in the home or make an informed decision with the family. And so we can stall the hospital for a little bit. Same at the nursing home. We can work with the social work staff there and with the family on doing appeals if needed and making sure that we've got a good plan in place for that next transition for your loved one. And that's where, again, having that professional is going to predict a better outcome for you than trying to do it on your own. Like Bob said, asking for help sooner rather than later is going to be more beneficial in the overall planning and the overall life that you've envisioned for yourself or your parents.
So that's great. And the other part of that, of course, is my side of it, which is one of the big questions that we have in that situation, which often the family hasn't really thought through because there's a crisis now. There was not a crisis. People just assumed that mom and dad would die peacefully in their sleep, or they didn't really think it through a lot. And so the idea is, what do we do now and how are we going to pay for that? So Danielle helps you with all of the what, and I help you with the how. How are we going to pay for it? And so, it is really important. That's a critical aspect of it. One of the things that I see families, Danielle, that will do is they'll say, okay, well, we can pay for this for 6 months. That's not enough. I mean, has anybody said that that's the life expectancy? I don't like to talk about life and death that way, but we kind of have to think about that. If we only have the money for 6 months, that's not the right answer. We got to find, if there's no reason to believe the person's not going to be with us in 6 months, we've got to find a longer term answer. Especially, what if there's a married couple and we say, well, we got some money for 6 months for dad. Okay, what happens when mom gets sick? What happens if mom falls? We can't do that. If we have enough resources that we can have the plan and we can say, okay, for the foreseeable future, meaning years, we can sustain this. We'll still talk about other options, but that's a much more comfortable position to be in. But if we say, okay, we can sustain this for, a few months, we probably shouldn't even make that move. A lot of people say, we're going to make this move because we're feeling so much pressure from the hospital or for the rehab center or wherever to leave that we're going to make this move and then we'll figure it out. Well, but then we've spent a good portion of the money while we're trying to figure it out. And what we can do is kind of, move it forward. So we start on third base, so to speak, where we start with a heads up, because we can help you move the conversation, really get you up to speed of here's the options, here's how we're going to pay for it. Let's not get into an option that is not going to last. That's not going to be helpful for us. It's actually going to slow us down and cause more problems. And so I'll tell you, we have, we're in demand. I'll admit that we have people that want to see us, a good number of people want to see us, but we always hold open appointments. I always hold at least 2 or 3 open appointments every week for those emergency appointments. So we usually can get you within a day or two, because if you're in the hospital, I kind of want to see the family before you leave the hospital. If you're in the rehab, I definitely want to see you before you leave the rehab. And so we always hold those emergency appointments just to get you in as quickly as possible when you're in that kind of crisis.
And Bob, too, family members don't want to be rushed when they're making this decision. They want to know that they're making the best decision, finding the best placement for their loved one, especially if it's going to be a longevity moment when their loved one's going to be there for a long time. And that's where we're able to kind of slow that process down and help you guys not feel so rushed to make a decision. And like Bob said, not make a decision based off because the hospital is pushing you out and now we're in a different situation. We're spending money that we maybe shouldn't have been, or we didn't need to spend money on.
So thank you so much, Danielle. This was very informative, great information. Hopefully you found it valuable and helpful. You can reach our office at 800-990-6030 or on the web at mannorlawgroup.com. And so we will look forward to hearing the next podcast for advice from your advocates. And thank you for joining us.